We're really excited to be here today to talk to you about our webinars. Nick is going to actually share her screen and start the presentation. I think.
I'm going to start now. Okay. You should be seeing it shortly. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Okay. So thanks to everybody for joining us today. We can talk a lot about webinars, so I hope we don't run over time. When we started our membership journey with Maverick Insider, we surveyed our members and asked them what was it that they wanted as a major benefit. And the overarching theme was they wanted interaction with our journalists. So live events became a huge component of what our membership could do. And then the pandemic hit, and suddenly all our great and grand plans for continued engagement with our members fell away, and we really did have a pandemic panic. We weren't just panicked as to how we were going to continue to connect with our audience, but also we were aware that with a pandemic there would be financial implications, and that membership was likely to be one of the things that would go off people's lists of essentials. So for us, we needed our members and readers to feel the connection with us was invaluable. One of our biggest issues after that, after we decided that we would bring all our events online, was that a lot of our audience didn't know what a webinar was. They'd never heard of a webinar. And so we literally had a captive audience who were in full level 5 lockdown. And we needed to educate them on what we were going to do, that this wasn't what had traditionally been thought of as a webinar, which was some marketing speak from the marketing manager of a big corporate pushing a product, but really live journalism events online. And there was quite a lot of training we had to do with our audience, giving them step-by-step guides of how to join. And the two biggest important aspects here were that we wanted to keep them free for everybody, particularly at that time. And we also, we wanted it to be easy for them, that they would just be able to click and join, understand what it was. And in order for the readers to really value what they were having or what they were partaking in, they needed to experience it. So by the choice to keep them free was easier to access, was easier to experience, and we prayed that that would build loyalty. At the time, there was a lot of panic around about the pandemic. Nobody knew what was happening. And we were able to, at that point, really bring the experts across the world to our readers and have their questions answered, which was an invaluable component that we'd never been able to do in any other area of our journalism before. It had always been filtered through a journalist, but here we had our readers and our members asking the questions directly themselves. So we decided that we wanted to host them ourselves in order to have complete control. We were always very proud of the events that we'd held at Daily Maverick. There was, and by having them on Webinar Jam, we'd be able to market all our future webinars, and to remember that getting those emails was absolute gold to us. And the reason we didn't do it on social like so many others had done is that we fundamentally believe that those on social are not actually interacting with you. They're interacting with Facebook or they're interacting with Twitter. And we didn't want to have the noise of social media. We wanted it to be a conversation that we could ask our readers and members to feel special and they could engage with. That has actually, what's come about from doing it that way is that we've actually created a new funnel for our audience who to become members. We did some looking back and another survey, and we discovered that only 50% of our webinar list were actually newsletter subscribers to Daily Maverick, and only 20% were members. So now we're able to put membership marketing to them and keep our webinars free for them. So deciding on the content. the most important thing was to uphold the Daily Maverick integrity of our journalism here. And it's very difficult when you have lots of sponsors seeing these big numbers of people coming in. And we really had to make sure that this wasn't sponsored content. So we had, Nicole and I did a very close collaboration with the editorial team. What did they feel were the great subjects that would work well in a webinar? We surveyed our audience, we got feedback from the webinar chat log and breaking stories, and suddenly our timetable started to build out and we were doing 3 webinars a week. From that, we'd get special edition newsletters stemming from the questions, where there was just so many questions coming in and so much engagement that actually we were able to have dedicated newsletters on that subject. Or alternatively, we realized, okay, every single one of these webinars now needs to be covered and become its own article and have the recordings put out for free. One of the absolute highlights for me, certainly, was when we actually had our Maverick Insider involvement. Early on, we needed some experts to join us for a panel discussion on COVID. And we looked into our member database of experts, and sure enough, we had a world-renowned virologist, and we also had a doctor who had worked in the Ebola crisis, and who were both more than happy to come on and be panelists and have the insiders asking insiders questions. And for me, I still call that my insider ecstasy moment, where the whole ecosystem of membership came together. So we have various familiar formats that we've decided, and this was something that, the potential for the webinar format exploded for us, and categorizing was important, not just for us, but also for our audience to understand, okay, this is going to be a book launch, or it's a Scorpio Scoop, which is a breaking investigation. We'd have post-screening Q&As for documentary filmmakers, and then various series or inside track conversations. So that's when we would have various experts come and let our audience speak to them directly. And then we just started experimenting with having Maverick Insider exclusives. So those are webinars that are just for our members. We've only had one so far, but the idea behind that is that there's no breaking news there. There's no information that the whole world needs to know. This is really behind the scenes, asking the journalists how they went about doing their investigations. And the sponsors, they say if you build it, they will come. And I'm very happy to report that in this case, it is true. We communicated a lot with our sales team, and we realized there were so many ways throughout Webinar Jam and our marketing that we could add value to a sponsor. And we started creating these webinar reports, which was showcasing just exactly how big the engagement was. And we made a decision early on that we wouldn't have a sponsor on the webinar. So if they were sponsoring it, they couldn't be a panelist, which caused our poor sales team much stress, but ultimately kept us away from it being sponsored content. We really wanted to respect our audience, and it's worked because our numbers have held, they have made it habitual. They think highly of our webinars, and it's worked for the sponsors too, because they also get it. They know that that's why people are coming on, is because we aren't putting out sponsored content as a webinar. So far this year, we've managed to already achieve 71% of the sponsorship that we achieved in the total of 2020. And
Thanks, Fran.
I pass over to Nicole, who's going to get into the nitty gritty with you.
Thanks, Fran. Hello, everyone. So how it works, as Fran mentioned, there was a panic to connect in the beginning when we first started the webinars, and it was sort of, a learning experience as we went. And as the webinars grew and as the list grew, we sort of had to pinpoint different engagement points and, see what worked best for our audience. So this is sort of what our reader engagement journey looks like at the moment. However, it is an ever evolving format, as is everything these days. So it's sort of a loop which starts the webinar newsletter. Our audience can then submit questions, which helps us get a better understanding of what content they want to hear from the webinar. We then use social media to drive signups into the live room. We have engagement within the live room. And then, as Fran mentioned, every article is written up and recorded. And then those recordings and articles are then shared again with all subscribers, as well as on the Daily Maverick website as well, and within various newsletters. So webinars, if you have the luxury of time, usually get about 6 weeks, 3 weeks marketing lead time. We did not have the space nor the luxury of time. As Fran mentioned, we were putting on 3 webinars a week in the beginning. So we had to be really clever with our marketing and, you know, find the places that were going to create the biggest impact as well. So we looked at, as the list grew, finding more ways to target relevant audiences. So there we use, you know, if we have a business themed webinar, we'll use our Business Maverick newsletter to market that webinar to the people who might be interested in hearing about it. And of course, as Fran mentioned as well, social media was still important because only 50% of the webinar subscribers were newsletter subscribers, which meant that we weren't going to reach all of them through our newsletters if that's where we were advertising. So we still do advertise on social media. And then, of course, we share marketing with our third-party panelists and sponsors as well to reach a wider audience. So the tech is one thing, but hosts and panelists make your show. And when I say that the training calls are non-negotiable, we still have a training call with every single panelist and host that we have on a webinar, which is now over 200. I think we're on webinar 122 was today. And Fran can jump in and tell you we've had some hair-raising moments where we've had to do between 8 and 10 test calls because connection.
I think what was extraordinary is this is something we didn't anticipate. And this was our biggest failure, I suppose, of the webinars, was that there was always going to be an issue, whether it be some sort of tech issue, there was no sound. We had everything that could have happened in a live event happened to us. We had blackouts. We had dogs barking to the point that the chat log was people saying, please show us your dog. It was really, really quite crazy. The pros, the guys who you think would be able to do this in their sleep, you know, they just hadn't thought about it. They just pitched up, and sure enough, they couldn't hear the questions. Nicole is furiously typing the answers that the panelists are saying so that the host can give follow-up questions. It was a nightmare, but what we did have is a really forgiving audience. And I think that, you know, admitting failure, telling people that you're working on it, that you're sorry about the tech issues, you're sorry about the sound issues, it actually goes a long way for people being very kind of kind to you. And it hasn't seemed to be something that has turned them away too much. So from our side, I think that one of the big learnings from that for us would be, don't be afraid to make the mistakes. The kind of mistakes can sometimes even be endearing.
And also, you know, through failure, you get better at planning, and you get better at having backup options, and you get better at using the WhatsApp back channel and stressing that with your host and your panelists and explaining the importance of that, streamlining template emails when you are prepping them for the call. As I'm sure a lot of all of you who were panelists today, you saw the email from Jakob. That's essentially what we have to do every time. And you realize that no one really likes to read, so you have to make sure that you're saying everything you need to say in as short a space of time, and follow up with a WhatsApp message to make sure that they've read everything and have understood. Live room engagement points, as I said earlier, these we also experimenting with, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't, and capitalizing on the things that do. You know, and this is where Webinar Jam is also great. It's a wonderful platform for engagement. There's a lot of different avenues that you can use. There are polls, there are offers. You know, you can keep your eye on the comments. You can delete comments that might be hostile. You know, with some bigger topics, you might get a few trolls around, which you need to keep your eye on. So that's really important. And yeah, just keep experimenting, which we still do. if there was one slide that I could tell you to take a screenshot of, or I'm sure these will be shared with everyone, but these are the biggest takeaways that we've had to date. And as mentioned, still learning and changing as we go. And also what works for us and the tips and tricks that we found help us meet our objectives might be different to you. So again, if you're giving it a go, I would say the best thing here is to track, trace, alter, and scale. So keep testing your marketing, test with the audience, speak to your audience, survey them, never assume that everything is okay. Always check in, make sure that your panelists and hosts know that you're there for them. As Fran said, you test the product before. We only reached our exclusive Maverick Insider webinar 115 webinars in. We had to make sure that it was something that, would be a benefit to them. Internet, obviously, in South Africa, we have this thing called load shedding, where they just shut down our power for hours at a time. So always having a backup plan and make sure that you're checking in with them. And last but not least, don't be intimidated. It was Fran and I that started the webinars, just us two. And I think, one other person on the team. And we, and also you can start small. So a big team does not necessarily indicate the level of success, as does the size of your audience. If you have a webinar and there are 100 people on, it's a fantastic form of engagement. And actually we find that the webinars with smaller audiences get amazing. You can answer more of their questions. So just give it a go. And
I would add in a little bit extra here with don't be intimidated. The one piece of advice, if webinars is something that you are looking at adding into your newsroom, is just make sure that you get somebody who's really, really passionate about it to run it. Nicole has run all 122 webinars that we've held since April 1st last year. And she talks this enthusiastically about it all the time, which makes it really quite enjoyable.
So will we carry on? I know we need to wrap up. I can see Aldana on the screen. Yes, we indeed will be carrying on. It is a new editorial arm of Daily Maverick. We actually hit our record number of attendees just 2 weeks ago on the 18th of July. We had 2,067 attendees. And as Fran mentioned, we are on the road to achieving the same sponsorship. So, yep, that's us.
They're here to stay.